I think the most important thing is that you have to pick a story that you care about, right? Because you'll, especially in your first couple of films, you'll never make money on them.
Even though the US went to war with Iraq over weapons of mass destruction, the world's biggest biological weapons program was developed in the Soviet Union. This is cholera.
Да, холера здесь.
And here?
Здесь у нас хранится антракс.
Yep.
My name is Entrew Tkach, and I'm a documentary filmmaker as well as broadcast journalist with about 30 years experience. Well, it's a big difference whether you're working for a network, a broadcast operation, or whether you're doing independent films. So at the networks, the idea is always very much based on ratings. I mean, I have my own personal vision of the subjects I'd like to cover, and I generally like to cover stories that can make a difference, whether it be human rights, whether it be environmental subjects. I don't feel like I want to invest my time and go to dangerous places if it doesn't have some kind of a positive impact. But when you work for a broadcast network, you have to convince the bosses that it appeals to the wider audience. I won a couple of Emmys. One was for investigating the trade of heroin from Burma all the way to Philadelphia. There was another one on, modern day slavery, which was shot in India and in Brazil and United States, and that was a 1-hour documentary. The first one at 60 minutes was for child soldiers, definitely. And that was, one of the more memorable stories that we produced. I mean, it was, we went to the war zone in northern Uganda, and when I went ahead to do the research, I mean, they basically, pointed to a hotel that had maybe 3 rooms left standing. The rest of it was just holes in the walls, and you could, see up to the ceiling, and you could hear gunshots, and that was the condition of the reporting. But it was, even if you're in that situation, what you have to do is you find a human story, So the human story was, that there was actually, a nun that was working there where the whole school was raided by child soldiers to capture other child soldiers to continue the war. And that had the greatest impact is, to seeing, that nun tell the story of what had happened in her school. These are, powerful moments that resonate, with you as a person and with the viewer, and you have to capture, that humanity. So I think that, one thing I've decided, like in my stage of my career, I don't do anything unless I'm interested in it, really, to be honest, So it means I'm probably working, much less on salary, much lower economic, kind of returns. But, I don't really feel like there's any need to do that at this point in my life, I feel that there's so many emergencies happening in the world, specifically environmental emergencies, and if you can make any kind of contribution to that, at this stage of my career, it's more important than making 2 or 3 times more money, than I could otherwise. I had made, like student films in high school, but the way it really started was after university. A friend of mine in university applied to do a film, got a grant to do a film on Indo-Chinese refugees in the United States. This is after Vietnam War, like 10 years later. And we basically moved to one of the towns where there was a huge concentration of, refugees from Laos, from Vietnam, from Cambodia, in a very rural American setting. And we basically, bought the equipment and just lived in that community for 3-4 months, to do the filming. So it was like an attempt to do just kind of a pure verite experience of what it was like, to be a refugee at that time. And we're talking like 20, 30 years ago, But we quickly ran out of money, And after 4 months, 5 months, I had to go back and I had to work as a carpenter, doing demolition in New York and in the daytime and trying to edit the film at night. And it took us like a year and a half to do one film, But pretty much everything I learned about filmmaking started from that experience, Because no matter how many classes you attend, no matter how many student projects you do, unless you fully commit yourself to something, totally, you're not going to learn, what drives you, what makes the film, specialty, what kind of style you want to work in. So that was the film, and it was called Postscript to a War. I think the most important thing is that you have to pick a story that you care about, right? Because especially in your first couple of films, you'll never make money on them, right? You have to invest all your time and you have to build. So pick something that you really care about, and then pick a great character. Nothing tells a story better than a personality that is going through some kind of life-changing event, whatever it is, and follow that person over time, and devote, yourself with passion to at least one project, because you never know when you're going to, strike gold when you really invest that. So there's a big difference, first of all, between what they call producers in film, and TV, right? And that's kind of always been misunderstood, right? So in fiction film, Hollywood, or big budget documentaries too, there's always a separate job, director, producer, right? And the producer is involved in, organizational, work pretty much. And the director is the creative vision that drives the film forward. But in television, where I worked, for most of my career, the director title was the person that was in the studio, right? When the program goes on the air and they punch the buttons, camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. And because of that, and because of union rules, you couldn't have a director title given to the person that directs the documentary in the field, right? So really, even though I was always a producer in the networks, I was also directing the films, right? And it's just, because of union rules. That's just the way it is in American television. And also because of the fact that you don't have that many, when you go out and do these documentaries in broadcast television, your crew is 3 people or 4 people. You don't have a separate director, producer. You're the producer, you're the director. You'll have a correspondent, you'll have a camera person, you'll have a sound person. That's the whole crew, and you'll have an associate most of the time. But when you go into the higher budget films, then there's clear delineation, between what a producer does and what a director does. And I think that, in those jobs, producers are critical. If it wasn't for, all the organization they do, putting all the pieces in place, putting the crew in place, they're like making the machine happen, and without an effective producer, the thing wouldn't work. We were in places where, the Salonga is a national park that's bigger than all of Belgium, and it has no roads, right? And to film, you have to walk through swamp water up to your waist, and then you have to camp. So at night, we would have army ants would come through the camp, and they'd have to start pouring gasoline. Otherwise, they would eat everything, the tent included. When you take off, you're so sweaty that there's these sweat beads that cover you, head to toe, when you stop, because they're just trying to get the salt off your body, right? And you get so covered in bites that there are more scabs than there are, skin, visible. And, it's kind of, you kind of learned not to pay attention to it. But when I came back from the Congo on this last trip, and I went to like a checkup to the hospital, they immediately took me in, gave me the complete, tropical screening, for every single possible disease, parasite, and because that was what we were exposed to. It's just really rough conditions. But one thing I remember is that when in the places that we were in, it was so hard to survive. For the local people, for instance, that when we landed in a bush plane, there was like a big argument on the side of the plane, and I thought, there was a big poisonous snake that they were arguing about, and I thought they were just arguing who they're going to kill, or who's going to kill it. And no, they had just slashed it, and they were arguing about who's going to get to eat it. And the story is that the reason is because they're so hungry. In a lot of these places in deep, like in the Congo, they're so starved with protein. That's why there's poaching. That's why they're killing, the wild animals that in the West we're trying to protect. So you're going into places where people are, really at like the edge of survival. But at the same time, there was no, nothing but hospitality showed to us, I would say. But it was basically like you have to learn to be very tolerant of discomfort, of being under really tough conditions.